We define ourselves through our history, culture, and food, but we so rarely think to stop and ask, how does it all work? Revealed examines the hows and whys while pulling the curtain back on the things you never thought to ask. On this episode, we look at how farming is done in the big city.
When you think of cities, you usually don't think of green. You usually think of buildings. You usually think of streets. We think of Central Park. We think of Prospect Park. But there are so many little pockets of green.
But NYC is also home to more than 550 community gardens, farms, and 29,000 acres of green space across all 5 boroughs.
So many businesses in New York City have roof space, have backyard space, and that space can be utilized to grow vegetables.
It means a lot to be able to show folks that even in a dense concrete jungle like New York, that you can still grow stuff.
What you'll see is urban agriculture, a growing movement to farm fresh food closer to urban populations. In 2022, the global market size for urban farming reached about $139 billion and is expected to reach $219 billion by 2028. For more than a century, New Yorkers have been finding creative ways to farm in the dense urban sprawl that is NYC. But when it comes to growing on a larger scale, it's best to look up and towards New Jersey.
We can take warehouse space, repurpose it, and set it up to be agricultural land, essentially.
Many see urban farming as a solution to climate change's impact on traditional farms, but it's not without its own issues.
Where are these farms getting their energy from?
But in a world where urban populations are on the rise and supply chain issues a constant challenge, innovation will be key when it comes to farming.
My name is Kiana Mickey, and I am New York City's first Urban Ag Executive Director. I got into urban agriculture about a little over 12 years ago. What really resonated for me was being a single mother, growing up in New York City, and now having my son, really thinking about what food I was able to bring home and how he was going to grow up, what access to green spaces he was going to have, as well as his schoolmates. I realized that we were facing some really big disparities depending on where folks live, what your access to community gardens would be, what you were learning in school, and even what you were getting to eat. So it really kind of propelled me to want to learn more and how to bring those lessons back to my community. One of the questions that often comes up is, what is the definition of urban ag? There's no singular definition for urban agriculture because it is unique to the space, places, practices, and models that are already happening in that city.
There's everything from community gardens to rooftop farms, for-profit, non-for-profit, indoor agriculture, folks who practice urban agriculture outside.
Urban agriculture specialist Melissa Metrick and director of urban agriculture Kiana Mickey envision a city of green where accessible food and agricultural knowledge can bring a sustainable future.
One thing that we do lack in urban areas is space. So when you're growing vertically, you conserve space.
Just across the Hudson River is Bowery's Research and Development Indoor Farming Facility. Founded in 2015, this vertical farm, housed in a repurposed New Jersey warehouse, focuses on growing crops hydroponically in vertically stacked trays.
Hydroponic farming is growing with water and not in a soil. So our crops have some support from a substrate, but they receive a continuous flow of water, which we deliver nutrients.
We're able to stack more crops on top of each other, grow in multi-dimension this way versus in an outdoor farm, you're going on one dimension this way.
Traditional farmhands are replaced with technology, meaning less handling of the crop during its life.
At Bowery, we grow a variety of different leafy greens and herbs. Some lettuces are dark leafy greens like kales, and our newest release, which is our spinach. We're super excited to launch spinach this fall. It's a massive milestone for Bowery, given that this is a crop famously fickle and hard to grow, both outdoors and indoors. And we're able to deliver a clean, pesticide-free, lush, earthy, nutty, deliciously tasting spinach to the marketplace.
Bowery delivers its fresh crops to groceries like Walmart and Whole Foods throughout the East Coast.
We have complete control over the growing environment, so we can customize the growing schedule, the crop environment, the light schedule to the particular needs of a component. And so they never experience any sort of stress, any sort of lack of nutrients or light or water in their life cycles.
Instead of this idea of controlling nature, which we have learned over and over again that we cannot control nature. That is a huge thing with indoor agriculture. How can we have this open source of technology where community members could all work together and build upon it?
Bowery's use of technology plays a huge role in its production with its use of automated seeding, automated transplantation of crops, and automated harvesting in the field.
We are driving innovation in indoor agriculture. The type of LED lights that we use in our farms, and what you'll see here is white light. So this is full spectrum light. It mimics the nature of sunlight in the range of wavelengths that are delivered to the crops.
Unlike traditional outdoor growing, which relies on the sun, one of the challenges of indoor vertical farming is energy.
One of the aspects that isn't as beneficial is the huge amount of energy that is used, and where is that energy coming from? Is it off the main grid? Is that main grid still using oil?
While these farms use 90 to 95% less water than traditional farming, they use significantly more energy than a traditional greenhouse. To combat this, many urban farms, like Bowery, are readjusting how they power their farms.
So we power our farms with 100% renewable energy, and with our future farms, we'll look to use renewable energy sources wherever possible.
We're continuing to drive forward in our research, partnering with folks in the lighting sector to look for even more energy efficient lights. We're looking at ways to optimize our growing recipe, the type of light that we use, so that those lights can become even more energy efficient.
Vertical farming isn't the only solution for the future of urban agriculture, but a part of a larger one. Before we look towards the future, we can take a glimpse in the past of all the hands involved in farming. New York City has a rich history when it comes to urban agriculture. Most New Yorkers today are living on what used to be farmland. As early as the 17th century, the city that never sleeps was covered in rolling hills and farms and neighborhoods from Midtown to the Upper West Side.
New York City used to be all farms. From Central Park and up, that was all farms. Even by the Bowery, that was farms. If you look at who is coming in and out of cities, especially during the 1890s and the beginning of the 19th century, you've had tons of immigrants coming through, and a lot of these immigrants actually had agricultural background.
The first community gardens in the U.S. were vacant lot gardens, which started during the economic recession in the 1890s. During both World Wars, New York City had victory gardens that supported the war effort to prevent food shortages. They were popular throughout the 1940s, but mostly faded away by the early 1950s. Fast forward a couple of decades, and the Green Guerrillas, a community gardening group formed in 1973 and played a pivotal role in reclaiming abandoned lots for community gardens.
New York City's rich urban agriculture history really can't be spoken without talking about the unheralded land stewards, community gardeners, folks that were growing when folks told us not to grow.
By the 1960s, black men and women moved up north with a wealth of agricultural knowledge and started many community gardens. In 1964, long-neglected trees died and only 4 trees remained in Bed-Stuy. Hattie Carthan, who was a pioneering force in the urban agriculture movement, has the perfect response: plant them.
Hattie Carthan is this amazing person who created a huge amount of change within a neighborhood. If you look at a lot of community gardens, they are in locations and within communities of people of color. She got the community involved to plant thousands of trees all along Bed-Stuy.
The symbol outside of the center is the southern magnolia, a representation of the Great Migration. Hattie Carthan was one of the first to bring the practices of conservation and environment education into the streets of Brooklyn. Today, many urban gardeners in the tri-state area are following in her footsteps. Urban agriculture takes many forms in cities, from expansive vertical farms housed in warehouses to small community gardens.
Pulling cucumbers.
But regardless of the approach, they all share a common challenge: a scarcity of space. This has many farmers looking to the roof.
I'm Chris Caliso, executive chef of Rosemary's. Rosemary's is special because of the rooftop garden. The fact that we were able to harvest every summer and be able to choose what we wanted to grow and what we can put on the menu and use for specials, that was definitely a pull for me when I started working here. The sun golds right now are like super sweet, whereas if you were to get sun golds from a purveyor, you don't know how long they've been sitting there. When you're just picking it straight from the vine, you know it's fresh. People love the idea of having food on the menu from the garden. And then you just have this beautiful garden right here with vegetables and stuff, which you're not used to.
The fight for space is a constant struggle in New York. Executive Chef Chris Caliso of Rosemary's worked with Brooklyn Grange to help repurpose their roof and build a garden.
I think that Rosemary's is a good example of how easy this is to do. So many businesses in New York City have roof space, have backyard space, and that space can be utilized to grow vegetables.
Brooklyn Grange builds and installs green spaces all over New York City and has the 2 largest soil-based rooftop farms in the world. These farms are located in Sunset Park and the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Combined, they are approximately 5 acres of growing space.
We work with Brooklyn Grange. Our current farmer is Mark. Really a lot of conversation between him and I about what we want to grow.
They approached us with the idea that they had a flat rooftop space. They're very interested in local agriculture. Rosemary's was actually our first off-site client, and we modeled the rooftop here after our own gardens that we'd built in the Brooklyn Navy Yard and in Long Island City. When we're designing a rooftop farm for a client like Rosemary's, one of the most important things is making sure that the building can maintain the weight of soil. We then work with the client to decide how big of a space they'd like. We usually try to maximize all of the space for growing. Every single thing on the roof at Rosemary's is served in the restaurant. It all stays right on the property.
Urban agriculture is not just limited to big restaurants and large companies with acres of warehouse space. There are more than 550 community gardens throughout the 5 boroughs.
With community gardens and urban farms in general, especially if the community is involved from the beginning, from the design process, from building the farm, it can become more than just growing food, but almost like a symbol of self-sustenance and community empowerment.
Giving young folks the knowledge and the ability to grow their own food, in their apartments, where you wouldn't think that you could grow stuff, is important, and you can just realize so much potential from that.
Can these actually be these like almost democratic spaces where folks can learn from older folks of how to grow food? So many of the younger generation don't know how to grow food. The more biodiverse amount of crops that you can grow, the better. Grow culturally relative varieties that you don't have access to. Grow things that might be too expensive or things that go bad in the fridge really quickly.
Many spaces in the city are trying to really grow a lot of food and feed their neighbors, and some of those spaces would identify as urban farms, and some of those spaces would probably still call themselves urban gardens, community gardens. Either of those spaces will identify with trying to be a space where folks can gather, where folks can feel connected to land, connected to ancestral traditions of growing food.
I'm back! Yo!
How you doing, man? Good to see you.
I'm good. How you guys doing?
Good to see you. What's up, Taylor?
Corey Blant is the Deputy Director of Urban Agriculture at New York Restoration Project. While maintaining and assisting urban farms and community gardens, NYRP provides educational workshops for community members.
I think we should take everything out and roll the net around one. We're doing invite urban ag professionals to do a tour of the garden at the end of the month. Woo! This is so exciting. Oh, it's good to be back, guys. New York Restoration Project, our urban agriculture program, it's technical assistance and educational services to folks who are trying to grow food in a school garden, in a community garden, on an urban farm. Recently, I think there's been a real interest at the city, state, federal level to sort of recognize urban agriculture as an important thing, as something that provides many benefits to neighborhoods, to communities, to individuals, and is thinking about how can we continue to support these sorts of projects and these sorts of spaces.
During the 1990s, many gardens were bulldozed to make room for developments. In 2023, the State Assembly passed a bill offering protections for community gardens.
In order to support existing urban gardens and farms, I think what is critical, and I hear often, is protecting their land security.
It's so interesting how a lot of neighborhoods that are being gentrified have so many community gardens. And maybe one of the reasons why they're being gentrified is because they have all this green space. Also because the rent is cheaper, but it is beautiful green spaces all around. And then of course the rents go up, and then those community gardens get kicked out and built upon.
Beyond the fresh food, soil-based rooftop farms serve as great insulation for a building and mitigates rainwater runoff from entering New York City's sewage system.
It's also great for mitigating the heat island effect of the city.
In an urban area like New York City, filled with concrete and skyscrapers, the temperature is higher in overdeveloped areas. Fewer green spaces contribute to higher temperature.
Every green space that we have in New York cools down the temperature, especially with climate change, with temperatures getting hotter and hotter. It's really important that we do whatever we can to regulate temperatures within the city. It keeps heat from being trapped in concrete and buildings.
What's undeniable about the world is how much more uncertain that our food system is becoming, between periods of floods and droughts, labor shortages, and what we've seen in terms of our supply chain. We know that we need a more resilient food system. At Bowery, we believe that we are just a part of a mosaic of solutions that will create a more resilient food system. So it'll be vertical farms, it'll maybe be things like regenerative agriculture, maybe be things like plant-based proteins and alternative meat production, but we are just a piece of the puzzle to help create a more resilient food system.
Urban agriculture is being looked at as a solution to a problem.
Sometimes I feel that urban agriculture is kind of looked at as this one thing or something to fix all the problems. Urban agriculture isn't going to solve like our climate crisis, right? It's not going to provide all the food for our populations in cities. There's many benefits to it, and it could help within a larger scale of looking at all of these issues. But I think sometimes that is an issue when it's looked at as like, we're gonna produce all of our food within, a 5-mile radius.
Heat waves, droughts, increased disease pressure, that's only going to get worse as climate change becomes more of a reality. And we need to have other systems that ensure we have a secure supply of food. So I really believe that this is part of our future. And as we continue to operate our farms, we are learning more and more about what is possible here. And the future is really, really exciting.
We grow 100 times more productive than outdoor agriculture on the same footprint of land. And one of the reasons why we're able to do that is because of how we grow. We are designing our own systems that involve things like automation, robotics, lights, sensors, data, and AI. And we're able to create microclimates for specific crops, giving them exactly what they need when they need it. And in theory, we could scale up or down those systems to fit in any type of space.
It's interesting how it can become more than just growing food, but almost like a symbol of self-sustenance and community empowerment. If the city is not providing for its citizens, how can citizens provide for themselves?
So if we're reducing our carbon footprint, if we're increasing hyper-local food production, especially food that's culturally relevant and folks need it here and now, this is a way that I think we can continue to find opportunities that folks can have a say in what's happening in their neighborhood, but also what's feeding and nurturing the city.
If we think creatively about the space that could be used for gardening, there's a tremendous amount of space that isn't used today. So I'd love to see it much more ingrained into just buildings as a whole, where it isn't necessarily community gardens or agricultural on its own in select places, but integrated into the daily lives and infrastructure and buildings around the city.
climate change is here and we're all gonna have to like put our brains together. There's multiple solutions in mitigating climate change within rural farming. So instead of like dividing outdoor agriculture and indoor agriculture and rural farmers and urban farmers, how could we all work together to look at these really big issues? They all are pieces of the puzzle that we all have to figure out how to put together to adapt, because that's going to be the name of the game.